it down yet, but it's all ready to go. It's nice and hard. I test bent these when they were 8-footers. I went and I picked out the tightest grained wood I could, the tightest grain with the least amount of grain run out, because this is a pretty severe bend between the breast hook and frame 5.5. So anyhow, I picked out the wood specifically for this bend, and I tested it before I ever scarf jointed. I screwed one end up here to the very tip of the breast hook, and I just started with my hand on that board, just started bending it around, and it was about 5 times easier than bending the chines. It made a really nice bend, really fair. It looked great, and it was easy to do just by myself. So, I'll get this cleaned up. I'll get it screwed on and glued to the stem. I'll start bending it around and then cutting my slots on angle, just like I did with the chine, and get it glued and screwed at each frame on both sides. And then I'll have to go buy another piece of wood, do the same thing all over again, because the shear is 2 laminations, basically. It's this with another one glued over the top of it. So I'll get these stretched on there and screwed down and glued, do a little update, and then I'll have to do it all over again and do another little update. So that's where we are, working on the shears. My goodness, now we're starting to look like a boat. I got the first layer of the shear stretched around. You can see I've got it just one screw holding it into the breast hook right now. Stretched around, and just like on the chine, I had to angle this cut until it laid nice and flat on each side. This one matched up really well. I didn't have to do any cuts on it. And I will have to do a little angling on that one, as well as chop them off back here at the transom. They're just sitting there. But man, talk about easy to bend. This 5/8 by 1.25" for the shear. Super easy. I was able to bend it around, hold it in place with one hand, drill and screw with the other. So it is unbelievably easier to bend than the chines were. So let's step back. Look at that. It's starting to look like a boat. Lines look really good. Everything looks nice and lined up. It looks symmetrical. That's the key to building a boat. Symmetry. Looks real nice. Here's a look at it down the side. You kind of get an idea of how the boat's going to look when it's flipped over. So anyhow, nothing's glued. I was just basically fitting it up and bowing it to see how it was going to turn out. Looking real good, making good progress. Now it's starting to look like a boat. Okay, so just a quick update. We've got frame 5.5 where it meets the chine, screwed in and glued. This is epoxy with a little bit of wood flour for thickener. And of course, the frames will get faired back later on in the planking procedure. But that was one of the last things I had to do to the chine, was get it seated squarely into the notch of frame 5.5. And this is how I did it. You can see here I've got a C-clamp clamped to the stem, a C-clamp clamped to the chine with a backer block, so it didn't put so much stress, kind of spreads the stress out a little bit farther, and a small chain come along in between the two to twist that into fitting into frame 5.5 where it should, nice and squarely. So it's under a tremendous amount of stress. But again, like I said in the previous video, I wanted to let it sit, for 2 or 3 days with the rest of my contact points glued up before I subjected it to a whole bunch of stress to get it in there. But it's a nice fair line. It looks really good. Well, that's how I did it. A couple of C-clamps and a come along between them to get that chine twisted. All right, well, it's November 1st. So for the month of October, we put in 19 hours on the zip, which brings us up to 75.5 hours total into the boat build, $937.29 invested. And let's take a look at where we're at. So what we have done in the last week or so is the shear lamination. The first lamination of the shear is officially glued and screwed in place on both sides. So I had them just stretched around testing fit, And I took my multi-tool, and of course I had to cut my slots on angle like I talked about previously. But after I got everything cut and fit well, I went ahead and got them bent around and epoxy and screwed to each frame, to the transom, to the stem. So the first lamination is done. You can see the screw hole right there. And here is a look at our scarf joint. Of course I still have to fair this down and here. And I'll have to do this once again all over. I'll have to go buy another piece of mahogany. I'll have to rip it into strips. I'll have to scarf join them into 16 footers. And it will get screwed right over the top of it, so it'll be 2 layers, but screwed into the breast hook and then epoxied all the way around. And I'll probably screw into the transom as well. And then I'll use, some of my C-clamps, basically all of my C-clamps, every 6 inches or so, all the way down to glue that second lamination on. And when that's finished, I'll come and do the same on the other side. After I got this all glued up, throughout this entire build, I'm constantly checking measurements to make sure things are square, that things are true, that things are plumb. And what I found was where this shear meets frame 2, right here, for some reason, the frame was 1/8 of an inch towards the bow, too far. I don't know why. It must have just slipped when I was screwing and gluing. So compared to the other side, this gap was 1/8 of an inch shy of the other side. And this gap was 1/8 of an inch shy of the other side, meaning this corner of the frame had to go that way 1/8 of an inch. So I pulled the screw out tonight, took my multi-tool and cut right under here and up the side, cut this loose, readjusted it, re-drilled, re-epoxied, and basically just reset the frame, and then I double-checked my measurements to make sure. And now everything is dead on like it should be. This gap between these 2 frames is the same as that gap between those 2 frames. This gap between frame 2 and the transom is the same as that gap between frame 2 and the transom. And frame 4 and 5 1/2, this gap is identical to that gap. And up here, frame 5 1/2 to the stem and breast hook, this gap is identical to this gap. So now everything is lined up exactly like it should be. 1/8 of an inch, probably you could have got away with it. No one would notice. But I knew it wasn't right. And like I've stated several times throughout the boat build in this video, I'm building this thing to the absolute best of my ability. And had I left that, I would have never, ever forgot that I took a shortcut. And that's just unacceptable. I'm building this boat to the very best of my ability. So I it took me an extra 45 minutes, but I'm doing it right. I'm not going to cut any corners. You can see that I have cut my battens short now. These may or may not end up being where they are. Once I get to the planking, then I'll know for sure. I may end up cutting these shorter. I don't know. I may end up fairing some of this. It just depends on how my planking lays over the top of it. But I got those cut back. And we'll get a look at the front of the boat. Oh my goodness, is that not beautiful? Look at that thing. It's turning out so nice. I'm so proud. Anyhow, so that's where we are now. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. Rate and comment. Check out Glenel's website. You can get plans for this boat. This is the Zip. And hundreds of other boats as well. So check out the website, glenel.com. And thank you for watching. We'll see you on the next Zip update.